What starts as a dream vacation spirals into a humiliating nightmare at 30,000 feet. Or rather, before even leaving the ground. A gate agent's cruel laughter. A child's silent shame over something as simple as her shoes. But they picked the wrong mother to mess with. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cause a scene. She made one call. And in minutes, the laughter stopped. The lights flickered. The screens went dark. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, one of the world's busiest, ground to a halt. This isn't just a story of disrespect. It's about how a mother's love, a hidden power, and a single phone call unleashed a storm of karma so severe, it turned a travel hub into a ghost town, and one woman's smug grin into a mask of pure terror. Stay tuned. The fluorescent lights of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport's Concourse C hummed with the usual chaotic symphony of a Tuesday morning. Suitcases rumbled across linoleum. Boarding announcements echoed with tinny insistence, and the scent of Cinnabon and stale coffee hung heavy in the air. For 10-year-old Amina Washington, it was a symphony of excitement. Tucked beside her mother, Serafina, she clutched her worn copy of the Chronicles of Narnia, her small backpack resting on her lap. Its straps were frayed, and the vibrant cartoon characters that once adorned it had faded, much like her simple dark blue canvas sneakers. Those sneakers were her favorites. They'd carried her through countless adventures in the park behind their apartment, navigated slippery creek beds on family hikes, and even once bravely stepped onto the stage for her fourth-grade spelling bee victory. They were, in Amina's eyes, her lucky shoes, imbued with memories and a comfortable, familiar embrace for her small feet. They were also objectively old. The rubber soles were separating slightly at the toes, the laces were a bit grimy, and the original deep blue had softened to a muted, dusty hue. Serafina Washington, a woman whose calm demeanor often masked a will of formidable steel, watched her daughter with a soft smile. Amina was practically vibrating with anticipation for their trip to visit her grandmother in California, a trip they'd saved up for over a year. Serafina, a history professor at a local college, didn't earn a fortune, but she was rich in intellect, dignity, and a fierce love for her daughter. They approached Gate C-33, where Global Voyager Airlines Flight 712 to Los Angeles was scheduled to begin boarding in 20 minutes. The queue was already forming, a motley collection of weary business travelers, eager tourists, and families wrangling restless children. Presiding over the gate desk was a woman whose name tag read Brenda. Brenda had a helmet of meticulously sprayed blonde hair, a slash of bright red lipstick that seemed to accentuate the downward turn of her mouth, and eyes that scanned the assembling passengers with an air of bored authority. As Amina and Serafina took their place in line, Amina, in her excitement, nudged her backpack slightly forward with her foot. It was a small, innocent movement, but it brought her worn sneakers into Brenda's direct line of sight. Brenda's eyes, which had been flicking disinterestedly over boarding passes, snagged on Amina's shoes. Her lips twitched. A small, almost imperceptible snort escaped her. Then, as if she couldn't help herself, a smirk bloomed on her face, followed by a low, breathy chuckle. It wasn't a warm, shared laugh. It was pointed, exclusionary, and laced with derision. Amina, sensitive and intuitive, felt the shift in atmosphere immediately. She looked up, her dark eyes wide, and saw the gate agent looking directly at her feet, a mocking glint in her eyes. Amina's cheeks flushed a painful hot crimson. She instinctively tried to tuck her feet further under the seat in front of her, a wave of shame washing over her. Her lucky shoes suddenly felt like glaring badges of poverty. Brenda, emboldened by her own perceived wit and perhaps the anonymity of her position, leaned over to her colleague, a younger man named Kevin, who looked perpetually harassed, and whispered something. Kevin glanced at Amina's shoes, then quickly looked away, a flush rising on his own neck. But Brenda wasn't done. She looked back at Amina, her smirk widening, and said, just loud enough for those nearby to hear, "Honey, did you forget to change out of your gardening shoes? We do have standards on Global Voyager, you know." The words, sharp and coated in condescension, hung in the air. Several passengers in the immediate vicinity turned to look. Some frowned in disapproval, others shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. Amina's eyes welled with tears. She bit her lip, trying desperately not to cry, and looked up at her mother, her small face a mask of confusion and hurt. Serafina's calm expression didn't change, but a chill entered her eyes. She placed a comforting hand on Amina's shoulder, then slowly, deliberately, met Brenda's gaze. "Excuse me," Serafina said, her voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable edge. "Is there a problem with my daughter's footwear?" Brenda, clearly not accustomed to being challenged, especially by someone she had already mentally dismissed, straightened up, her smirk morphing into a defensive sneer. "Well, they're hardly appropriate for air travel, are they? We have an image to maintain. Some people just don't understand common decency." She ran a disdainful eye over Serafina, who was neatly but modestly dressed in comfortable travel clothes. The implication was clear. You people. The casual cruelty, the public humiliation of her child, and the blatant prejudice in Brenda's tone ignited a cold fury within Serafina. But her voice remained deceptively mild. "My daughter's shoes are clean, they are functional, and they are certainly no one's business but her own. And as for standards and decency, perhaps you should reevaluate your own given your behavior." Amina, despite her tears, felt a small surge of pride at her mother's words. She squeezed her mother's hand. Brenda's face hardened. "Look, lady, I don't have time for this. If you can't afford proper attire for your child, that's your problem. Just don't expect any special treatment." She sniffed, then turned pointedly towards her computer screen, dismissing them. The sheer audacity, the unprovoked venom was breathtaking. Serafina knew she could escalate this with the gate agent, demand a supervisor. But she also knew the dismissive nature of bureaucracy. Brenda was a symptom, not necessarily the root cause of an attitude that sometimes festered in places of petty power. And the hurt in Amina's eyes demanded more than just a slap on the wrist for this woman. It demanded a lesson. Serafina squeezed Amina's shoulder gently. "It's okay, sweetheart," she murmured, her voice now soft and reassuring. "Some people are just unkind. It says nothing about you and everything about them." She then looked at Amina's shoes. "And for the record, I love your shoes. They've got character." Amina managed a watery smile. Serafina then stepped slightly aside from the queue. She took out her phone. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of calm efficiency. She scrolled through her contacts, her thumb hovering over a name. It was a name she hadn't called in years, a contact from a very different chapter of her life, a chapter before academia, when she'd worked pro bono on a high-profile civil rights case that had far-reaching implications, even touching the complex administrative networks of city and state infrastructure. She pressed the call button. As the phone rang, she looked at Brenda, who was now smugly calling for Zone 1 boarding, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to break. The call connected. "Marcus, it's Serafina Washington," she said, her voice low and even. "I apologize for calling you unannounced, but I'm at Hartsfield-Jackson, Concourse C, Gate C33, and I have a rather serious situation here that I believe warrants your immediate attention. It involves discriminatory practices by airline staff and a potential, let's call it, a customer environment issue that could have broader implications." She listened for a moment, her eyes still fixed on Brenda. "Yes," she continued, "my daughter was publicly humiliated by a gate agent for the perceived inadequacy of her shoes. But it's the attitude, Marcus, the blatant disregard. It makes one wonder what other standards are being selectively enforced here." Another pause. Then Serafina said, "I believe it might be beneficial if operations at this particular gate, perhaps even this section of the concourse, were temporarily paused to fully assess the situation and ensure all personnel are aligned with appropriate professional conduct. This isn't just about one rude employee, Marcus. This feels systemic." A longer pause. Amina watched her mother, fascinated. Serafina's tone was so calm, yet there was an undercurrent that Amina had rarely heard, a resonance of authority that seemed to make the very air around them still. "Thank you, Marcus," Serafina finally said. "I appreciate your prompt attention to this. We'll be right here." She ended the call. She turned back to Amina. "Okay, baby girl, let's just wait a moment." Brenda was now scanning boarding passes, her earlier smugness firmly back in place. "Zone 2, now boarding, Zone 2, she called out, her voice echoing slightly. Less than 2 minutes later, the overhead lights in their immediate section of Concourse C flickered. Once, twice, then they went out, plunging Gate C-33 and the adjacent gates into a dim, emergency-lit twilight. The large flight information display screens above the gate blinked off, one by one, followed by the smaller screens at the desk. Brenda's computer monitor went black. Her boarding pass scanner beeped erratically and died. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Brenda stared at her blank monitor, her mouth falling open. "What in the world?" she muttered, jiggling the mouse. "Kevin, did you trip a breaker?" Kevin, looking equally bewildered, shook his head. "No, everything just died." Then a new voice, calm but authoritative, came over the concourse-wide PA system, a voice that was definitely not the usual automated recording. "Attention, passengers in Concourse C, Gate C30 through C45. We are experiencing a temporary operational issue. For your safety and security, all boarding procedures in this section are hereby suspended. Please remain calm and await further instructions. Airport personnel will be available to assist you." The announcement repeated. Panic began to bubble. Passengers looked around, alarmed. Airline staff at other gates looked confused, getting on their walkie-talkies. Brenda looked completely flabbergasted. Her red lipstick seemed to stand out starkly against her suddenly pale face. She looked around wildly. Then her eyes fell on Serafina, who was standing quietly with Amina, an unreadable expression on her face. A tiny seed of unease, cold and sharp, began to sprout in Brenda's chest. This was not normal. This was unprecedented. The sudden descent into semi-darkness and the cessation of all activity at a dozen gates sent ripples of confusion and then anxiety through the crowded concourse. Phones immediately came out, passengers trying to get information, their faces illuminated by the ghostly glow of their screens. The hum of conversation escalated into a nervous buzz. Children started to fuss. "What's going on?" a man in a business suit demanded, striding up to Brenda's now darkened counter. "I have a connection to make." Brenda, still reeling, could only stammer, I don't know. We seem to have a power outage in this section. A power outage that selectively targets a dozen gates and triggers a security announcement?" A woman with a skeptical look retorted. "Highly unlikely." Serafina watched the unfolding scene, her expression carefully neutral. Amina, however, looked at her mother with newfound awe. She didn't understand exactly what was happening, but she knew, with the certainty of a child who trusts her parent implicitly, that her mother was somehow at the center of it. The shame she'd felt moments before was being replaced by a strange, protective pride. Within minutes, figures in bright yellow airport operations vests began to appear, their walkie-talkies crackling. They were quickly followed by several uniformed Atlanta Police Department officers who typically patrolled the airport, their expressions serious and watchful. They weren't running, but they moved with a purpose that amplified the tension. "Please, folks, we need to keep the central walkway clear," one of the operations supervisors announced, his voice amplified by a small bullhorn. "We're trying to assess the situation." Brenda's colleague, Kevin, was frantically trying to get someone on his own airline-issued walkie-talkie, but it seemed to be emitting only static. "Everything's down," he said to Brenda, his voice tinged with panic. "The network comms. It's like we're isolated." Brenda's gaze kept drifting back to Serafina. The quiet dignity of the woman, the way she stood unfazed amidst the growing chaos, was deeply unsettling. The earlier incident with the shoes, Brenda's own snide comments, replayed in her mind, now tinged with a dawning horror. Could this somehow be because of that? Impossible. It was just a pair of old shoes, just some random woman and her kid. but the seed of unease was now a rapidly growing vine constricting her breath. Then a new group arrived, moving with an air of authority that eclipsed everyone else. Leading them was a tall, impeccably dressed black man in his late 50s. His suit was sharp, his demeanor calm but radiating an intensity that commanded attention. This was Marcus Thorne, Deputy Director of Operations for Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. He was flanked by 2 assistants clutching tablets and what looked like the airport's head of security. Marcus Thorne was not a man who typically involved himself in minor gate disturbances. His presence signaled that this was far beyond a tripped circuit breaker. He surveyed the scene, his eyes taking in the darkened gates, the anxious passengers, the stressed airline staff. His gaze swept past Brenda without a flicker of recognition and landed on Serafina. He gave a very slight, almost imperceptible nod. Serafina inclined her head in return. Marcus then turned to the highest-ranking Global Voyager Airlines manager on site, a flustered station chief named Henderson who had rushed over from another concourse. "Mr. Henderson," Marcus began, his voice low but carrying easily. "I understand there was an incident here at Gate C-33 just prior to this operational suspension." Henderson, mopping his brow, stuttered, "Mr. Thorne, yes, we're still trying to understand what happened with the power, sir." "The power is a symptom, Mr. Henderson, not the cause," Marcus stated coolly. "I'm referring to an alleged incident of discriminatory behavior by one of your gate agents, specifically targeting a child." His eyes flicked towards Amina, then back to Henderson. Brenda, who had been trying to make herself small behind the counter, felt a cold dread grip her. He knew. He knew about the shoes. Her mind raced. How could he possibly know? Who was this woman? Henderson looked blank for a moment, then horrified as the implication of Marcus Thorne's focus became clear. "Discriminatory behavior. Here, by my staff, I wasn't aware, sir." He shot a panicked look towards Gate C-33. Marcus Thorne's gaze now settled directly on Brenda. It was like being pinned by a laser. "Ma'am," he said, his voice devoid of warmth, "would you please step out from behind the counter?" Brenda felt her legs turn to jelly. All her earlier bravado, her sense of superiority, had evaporated, leaving behind a raw, exposed fear. Slowly, mechanically, she walked around the counter, acutely aware of every eye in the vicinity on her. The passengers, her colleagues, the police officers, the airport executives, they were all watching. "What is your name, ma'am?" Marcus asked. Brenda Jenkins, sir," she managed, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Miss Jenkins," Marcus continued, his tone still level but carrying the weight of serious inquiry. "It has been reported to me that you made disparaging and humiliating remarks to a young passenger regarding her attire, specifically her shoes. Is this accurate?" Brenda's mind was a maelstrom. Deny it? But the woman, Serafina, was right there, and her daughter. Other passengers might have heard. Her colleague Kevin certainly had. Her eyes darted towards Kevin, who looked down at his shoes, refusing to meet her gaze. Traitor, she thought, even as she knew he was just scared. It was a misunderstanding, Brenda stammered, wringing her hands. I made a comment about general airport policy, dress code. Her voice trailed off. Even to her own ears it sounded pathetic and false. Serafina, silent until now, spoke up, her voice clear and unwavering. She told my 10-year-old daughter, in front of numerous other passengers, that her shoes were inappropriate, asked if she'd forgotten to change out of her gardening shoes, and stated that Global Voyager Airlines has standards. She then implied we couldn't afford proper attire. Amina, emboldened by her mother's strength and the serious attention of the important-looking man, looked directly at Brenda. The lingering tears in her eyes gave her a look of wounded innocence that was more damning than any adult accusation. Marcus Thorne listened intently to Serafina, then turned his gaze back to Brenda. The temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop several degrees. Miss Jenkins, Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, in conjunction with all our partner airlines, has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination and harassment of any kind. Humiliating a child over her footwear is not only unprofessional and unkind, it is a serious breach of those policies. And frankly, it's an embarrassment to this airport and this city. Brenda opened her mouth, then closed it again. What could she say? The words gardening shoes echoed in her mind, mocking her. Her career, which she'd held for 15 years, a job that gave her a sense of importance, of being in control, felt like it was crumbling around her. Mr. Henderson, Marcus said, turning to the Global Voyager station chief. I expect Global Voyager to conduct a swift and thorough internal investigation into Miss Jenkins's conduct. In the meantime, Miss Jenkins is to be immediately suspended from all duties pending the outcome of that investigation. Furthermore, her airport access credentials are to be temporarily revoked. She will be escorted from the premises. Brenda gasped. Suspended? Escorted out? Like a criminal? The humiliation was a physical blow. Her face, already pale, turned ashen. But There are no buts, Miss Jenkins, Marcus said, his voice now like ice. Consider this a moment for you to reflect on your professional responsibilities and the impact of your words. He gestured to one of the airport security officials. Please see to it. The security officer stepped forward. Ma'am, if you'll come with me. Tears of self-pity and rage welled in Brenda's eyes. This couldn't be happening, all because of some brat's dirty sneakers and her mother. Who was she? Some kind of activist? Someone with connections? The woman had made one phone call, and the whole damn terminal section had shut down. The power of that realization was terrifying. As the security officer gently but firmly guided a now sobbing Brenda away from the gate area, past the stunned onlookers and her equally shocked colleagues, a ripple of murmurs followed her. The smug gate agent who moments before had wielded her petty power with such disdain was now the one being publicly shamed, stripped of her authority. Marcus Thorne watched her go, his expression stern. Then he turned to his team. All right, let's get operations incrementally restored, starting with the furthest gates. I want a full diagnostic on the electrical cut, though I suspect it was a targeted manual override from central control. And I want a report on my desk by noon regarding any prior complaints filed against Miss Jenkins or similar incidents at this airline. His assistants nodded, already tapping furiously on their tablets. He then approached Serafina and Amina. His stern demeanor softened slightly. Professor Washington, he said, addressing Serafina formally, indicating a prior, more than casual acquaintance. I am deeply sorry for the distress caused to you and your daughter. This is not reflective of the standards we strive for at Hartsfield-Jackson. Serafina nodded. Thank you for your swift response, Marcus. I appreciate it. The use of his first name was subtle but confirmed their connection to anyone still listening. He then crouched down slightly to Amina's level. And young lady, he said, his voice kind, I hope you can still enjoy your trip. No one should ever make you feel bad for who you are or what you wear. Your shoes look like they've carried you on many fine adventures. Amina shyly managed a small smile and a nod. They're my lucky shoes, she whispered. I can see that, Marcus said with a genuine smile. Very lucky indeed. He stood up. Mr. Henderson, I trust you will ensure Professor Washington and her daughter are boarded without any further issue, perhaps with an upgrade for their trouble. Henderson, eager to mitigate the damage, nodded vigorously. Absolutely, Mr. Thorne. Right away. We'll take care of everything. As the lights in Concourse C began to flicker back on, gate by gate, and the flight information screens rebooted, a sense of normalcy slowly began to return. But for everyone who had witnessed the events at Gate C-33, particularly the staff of Global Voyager Airlines, things would never be quite the same. The swift, decisive action had sent a clear message. Serafina took Amina's hand. The storm had passed, for now. But the tendrils of consequence for Brenda Jenkins were only just beginning to tighten. And the story of the gate agent who laughed at the wrong little girl's shoes was about to become a legend in the annals of airport lore. The departure of Brenda Jenkins, a stark figure of dejection escorted by airport security, was the immediate visible consequence. But the shutdown of a significant portion of Concourse C at Hartsfield-Jackson, even for a little over an hour, was like dropping a boulder into a meticulously arranged pond. The ripples spread far and wide, creating logistical nightmares and setting in motion a chain of events that Brenda, in her wildest imaginings, could never have foreseen. Flights were delayed, causing missed connections not just in Atlanta, but across the country and even internationally. Global Voyager Airlines, already under scrutiny, now faced a barrage of frustrated passengers, operational overtime costs, and the dawning realization that this incident was going to be a public relations disaster. Mr. Henderson, the station chief, was in damage control mode, personally overseeing Serafina and Amina's reaccommodation. They were swiftly upgraded to first class, offered apologies laden with complimentary travel vouchers, and treated with a deference that bordered on reverence. Amina, nestled in a plush, oversized seat, sipping orange juice from a real glass, felt a strange mix of residual hurt and burgeoning wonder. Her mother, calm as ever, simply accepted the apologies with grace, her demeanor making it clear that this was not about personal gain, but about a principle. Meanwhile, in the airport's central operations hub, Marcus Thorne was dissecting the incident with surgical precision. "The call came from me, yes," he explained to the airport director and the head of airline relations, who had been urgently summoned. "Professor Serafina Washington is not just any concerned citizen. Some of you may be too young to remember the East Side Housing Initiative case from 15 years ago. She was the lead counsel for the plaintiffs. It was a landmark civil rights victory that forced the city and several major corporations, including entities with significant airport contracts, to overhaul their discriminatory practices. She's not someone who makes frivolous complaints. When Serafina Washington tells you there's a systemic issue, you listen." The airport director, a man named Charles Penwright, winced. He remembered the case vaguely. A protracted, messy legal battle that had cost the city millions and a great deal of political capital. The idea that someone involved in that was now at the center of an airport incident was deeply troubling. "So the shutdown," Penwright began, "was a measure to get immediate, unequivocal attention and to ensure we could address the situation without further escalation at the gate level," Marcus finished, "and to send a message, a strong one. We've been getting whispers about declining customer service standards and isolated incidents of staff arrogance, particularly with certain carriers. This, unfortunately, was a very public, very ugly example. Professor Washington's call simply provided the fulcrum. The head of airline relations, a woman named Diane Rourke, looked grim. Global Voyager is going to have a field day with the FAA over the shutdown itself, regardless of their agents' behavior. "Let them," Marcus said calmly. "We have a documented history of attempting to address service inconsistencies through standard channels. This situation, involving the public humiliation of a child by an airline representative on airport property, gave us leverage to demonstrate the potential severity of unchecked misconduct. The temporary suspension of operations in that specific sector was framed as a necessary step to investigate a sudden and credible report of compromised professional standards affecting passenger welfare and security protocols. It's amazing how quickly people cooperate when you use the right lexicon." His smile was thin. "Besides, the initial fault lies with their employee. Our response, while robust, was to an issue they created. The targeted manual override of the power and network in that section of Concourse C was, as Marcus suspected, an extreme but available protocol, usually reserved for specific security breaches or localized technical emergencies. Its use in this context was audacious, a testament to Marcus Thorne's authority and his conviction that a serious lesson needed to be taught. He had, in essence, used a cannon to kill a fly, but his aim was to eradicate the entire nest. The internal investigation into Brenda Jenkins began almost immediately at Global Voyager Airlines. Her personnel file was pulled. It painted a picture of an employee who, while generally meeting basic job requirements, had a recurring pattern of minor passenger complaints over the years. Curt, unhelpful, dismissive were terms that appeared more than once. None had been serious enough on their own to warrant more than a verbal warning or a note in her file. But now, under the intense scrutiny generated by the Hartsfield-Jackson shutdown and Marcus Thorne's personal interest, these small incidents formed a disturbing mosaic. Kevin, Brenda's junior colleague at Gate C-33, was interviewed. Pale and nervous, he recounted Brenda's remarks about Amina's shoes, her dismissive attitude toward Serafina, and her general air of disdain. He also reluctantly admitted that this wasn't entirely out of character for Brenda, though she'd never been so blatant or cruel in his presence before. Other Global Voyager employees, emboldened by Brenda's suspension and the seriousness of the airline's response, began to come forward with their own stories of Brenda's preferential treatment for certain passengers, her often abrasive demeanor with colleagues she deemed beneath her, and her tendency to mock passengers after they had departed the gate. The story, as stories in the tight-knit airport community often do, began to spread like wildfire, not just within Global Voyager, but among other airlines, concession workers, TSA agents, and airport staff. It was quickly dubbed Shoegate, or the call that closed Concourse C, and the details, as they were whispered and retold, began to paint Serafina Washington, not just as an aggrieved mother, but as a figure of almost mythical power, the woman who could shut down the world's busiest airport with a single phone call. While an exaggeration, the core truth resonated. A line had been crossed, and the consequences were swift and severe. For Brenda Jenkins, the world had shrunk to the confines of her small apartment, the silence deafening after the constant thrum of the airport. Her initial sobbing fit had given way to a bewildered anger, then a gnawing fear. She'd called her union representative, of course. The rep had sounded sympathetic but cautious, explaining that the airline was taking this extremely seriously, given the airport authorities' direct intervention. Brenda replayed the morning's events endlessly. The little girl's shabby shoes, her own ill-advised, snarky comments. Why had she said those things? Habit, mostly. A way to feel superior, to alleviate the boredom of a repetitive job. She'd always prided herself on her standards, on looking the part of a polished airline professional. She'd seen passengers in all states of dress, but there was something about the combination of the girl's worn shoes and the mother's quiet dignity that had, for some inexplicable reason, irked her, prodded her into that moment of casual cruelty. Now, that moment threatened to destroy everything. She thought of her mortgage, her car payments. Her job at Global Voyager was more than just a paycheck. It was her identity. Who was she without the uniform, the authority, the backdrop of a bustling international airport? Her phone rang. It was a reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. "Miss Jenkins, my name is Sarah Choi. I'm following up on a significant operational disruption at Hartsfield-Jackson this morning. Sources say it stemmed from an incident involving a gate agent. Your name has been mentioned." Brenda slammed the phone down, her heart pounding. The media. How had they gotten her name already? The walls of her apartment suddenly felt like they were closing in. This wasn't just an internal disciplinary matter anymore. This was becoming public. The ripple effect was also being felt by Amina. On the plane, cocooned in the luxury of first class, she had initially felt a confusing mix of excitement and lingering sadness. But as she watched her mother interact with the flight attendants, who were now almost tripping over themselves to be accommodating, she saw the respect Serafina commanded, not through aggression, but through an unshakable sense of self-worth. Her mother hadn't yelled or made a scene. She had acted. Later, as they were cruising at 35,000 feet, Serafina turned to Amina. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "I want you to understand something. What that woman did was wrong. It was unkind, and it was based on prejudice. Your shoes tell a story of a life well lived, of play and adventure. Never let anyone make you feel ashamed of who you are or where you come from. Dignity isn't about expensive clothes, it's about how you carry yourself and how you treat others. Amina nodded, absorbing her mother's words. Did you make them turn off the lights, Mommy? Serafina smiled faintly. Let's just say I know some people who take kindness and respect very seriously. And sometimes when people in charge forget how important that is, they need a strong reminder. Amina thought about that. A strong reminder. It sounded much more powerful than just getting someone in trouble. It sounded like changing things. And things were indeed changing. Back in Atlanta, Marcus Thorne was already drafting a memo to all airline station managers operating out of Hartsfield-Jackson. It was a pointed reminder of the airport's code of conduct, the zero-tolerance policy on discrimination, and the expectation that all airline partners would proactively ensure their staff were not only trained, but also consistently adhered to these principles. He also scheduled mandatory retraining sessions for airport-facing staff from several airlines, starting with Global Voyager. The Shoegate incident was becoming more than just an anecdote. It was a catalyst. It had exposed a vulnerability, a point of friction in the massive, complex machinery of the airport. And now, measures were being taken to address it systemically. All because Brenda Jenkins had decided to laugh at a little girl's old shoes. She had no idea of the true extent of the hornet's nest she had kicked, or the hard karma that was still meticulously charting its course towards her. The days following Shoegate were a blur of anxiety and mounting dread for Brenda Jenkins. Her suspension from Global Voyager Airlines felt like a suffocating blanket. The initial union support, while present, was tempered by the airline's increasingly grim stance as their internal investigation dug deeper. It turned out that Brenda's file, while not egregious enough to trigger termination before, now formed part of a larger narrative when combined with new witness statements. Colleagues who had previously tolerated Brenda's abrasive personality or kept silent about her minor transgressions now felt empowered to speak. An anonymous tip line set up by Global Voyager in the wake of the incident yielded several more accounts. One recalled Brenda loudly ridiculing a non-native English speaker for struggling to understand a boarding announcement. Another described her deliberately ignoring a passenger in a wheelchair who needed assistance, until a supervisor intervened. A third recounted seeing Brenda pocket small, inexpensive items left behind by passengers at the gate. A forgotten paperback, a child's small toy, a neck pillow, things deemed too trivial to report individually, but which, collectively, painted a picture of someone with a troubling sense of entitlement and a lack of basic integrity. These weren't just about rudeness anymore. They hinted at a pattern of behavior that ranged from unprofessional to borderline unethical. The incident with Amina Washington's shoes, while seemingly minor on its own, had become the bright, undeniable flare that illuminated this darker landscape of conduct. Marcus Thorne at Hartsfield-Jackson received daily updates. His team was also reviewing CCTV footage from Gate C-33 and surrounding areas, not just from the day of the incident, but from previous weeks. While the audio was often indistinct, Brenda's body language, her facial expressions when dealing with certain passengers versus others, told a story. There was a clear difference in her engagement with those she perceived as affluent or important, and those she seemed to dismiss, often, though not exclusively, people of color or those who appeared less wealthy. It's subtle most of the time, a security analyst reported to Marcus, but it's there. A kind of microaggression, a dismissiveness that wouldn't warrant a complaint on its own. But the incident with Professor Washington's daughter, that was overt. She felt comfortable enough to be openly derisive. Comfortable because she felt untouchable, Marcus mused, or because she thought no one of consequence was watching. The media, initially sniffing around the edges, began to piece together a more coherent story. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporter Sarah Choi was persistent. She spoke to passengers who had been on Flight 712, some of whom had witnessed the initial confrontation. She spoke to disgruntled former Global Voyager employees. The narrative was shifting from airport disruption to airline employee misconduct and potential systemic issues. Brenda, isolated and increasingly desperate, made a series of bad decisions. Instead of quiet contrition, she oscillated between tearful pleas to her union rep and angry justifications to anyone who would listen, including a few former colleagues she hoped would rally to her side. It was just a joke, she'd insist. People are too sensitive these days. That mother, she's some kind of troublemaker, probably looking for a payout. Her attempts to garner sympathy backfired spectacularly. When one of her few remaining work friends suggested she just lay low and let the union handle it, Brenda snapped. Lay low? They're trying to ruin my life over a pair of stupid shoes. That woman, Serafina Washington, she's got some kind of vendetta. Maybe I should find out more about her, see what skeletons she has in her closet. This ill-advised comment, made in a moment of panic and fury, reached the ears of a global Voyager manager, who duly noted it. It suggested a lack of remorse and, worse, a potential for retaliatory behavior, which further solidified the airline's resolve to take decisive action. Brenda's paranoia grew. She started to believe there was a conspiracy against her. She spent hours online, not reflecting on her actions, but trying to dig up information on Serafina Washington. She found articles about Serafina's past legal victories, her academic work on social justice. This only fueled Brenda's resentment. To her, Serafina wasn't a champion for the underdog. She was a powerful, manipulative woman who had used her connections to destroy Brenda's career over nothing. In a particularly misguided move, Brenda decided to try and contact Marcus Thorne directly. She found his office number through an old airport directory online. Leaving a rambling, tearful voicemail, she pleaded for her job, blamed Serafina for blowing things out of proportion, and even subtly threatened to go to the press with her side of the story about how unfairly she was being treated. When Marcus Thorne listened to the voicemail, his expression hardened. "This woman," he said to his assistant, "is her own worst enemy. She still doesn't understand the gravity of her actions, nor the principles at stake." He instructed his assistant to ensure the recording was passed to Global Voyager's HR department as further evidence for their investigation. It demonstrated a profound lack of judgment and an unwillingness to accept responsibility. The hard karma that Serafina had silently wished for wasn't a mystical force. It was the natural, inexorable consequence of Brenda's own actions, amplified by the system she had disrespected. Every lie, every justification, every attempt to deflect blame, only dug her hole deeper. Meanwhile, Serafina and Amina were enjoying their time in California with Amina's grandmother. Amina, away from the pressures of the airport and buoyed by her mother's strength and her grandmother's loving presence, was slowly regaining her usual cheerful disposition. They bought her a new pair of sneakers, bright, colorful ones that she picked out herself. But she didn't discard her old blue canvas shoes. She tucked them carefully into her suitcase. They were still her lucky shoes, and now they had an even bigger story to tell. Serafina received a brief professional call from a vice president at Global Voyager Airlines. He offered another profuse apology on behalf of the airline and informed her that Miss Jenkins's employment was undergoing a final review, but that swift and appropriate action was being taken to address her conduct and to reinforce company-wide training on customer respect and anti-discrimination policies. He also mentioned that several systemic changes were being implemented regarding complaint handling and staff oversight. Serafina listened, thanked him for the update, and reiterated that her primary concern had always been for her daughter's well-being and the principle of respectful treatment for all passengers. She sought no personal damages, only the assurance that such an incident would not be repeated. Her calm, principled stance only further highlighted the chasm between her character and Brenda's. The investigation at Global Voyager was nearing its conclusion. The file on Brenda Jenkins was now thick with witness statements, prior complaints, her own ill-advised communications, and even a summary of the CCTV observations provided by Hartsfield Jackson. The picture was no longer one of a single, isolated mistake, but of a clear pattern of escalating misconduct, culminating in the very public humiliation of a child and the subsequent disruption of airport operations. The liability to the airline was significant, not just financially, but reputationally. Brenda, unaware of the full weight of evidence against her, still clung to a sliver of hope that her 15 years of service might count for something, that she might get a final warning, perhaps a mandatory retraining course. She couldn't or wouldn't grasp that she had crossed a line from which there was no easy return. The call from Global Voyager's head of human resources finally came. Brenda's heart leaped, then sank as she heard the grave tone in the HR director's voice. "Miss Jenkins," the voice said, cool and formal, "we have completed our investigation into the incident on—" Brenda braced herself. The karma she had so carelessly invited was about to deliver its final, crushing blow. The voice on the other end of the line, Mr. Alastair Finch, Global Voyager's head of human resources, was the epitome of corporate finality. "Miss Jenkins, following a thorough investigation into the events of Tuesday, October 17th, at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, Gate C-33, and a review of your overall employment record, including multiple new witness statements and previously documented complaints, we have reached a decision." Brenda held her breath, clutching the phone so tightly her knuckles were white. The silence from Finch's end seemed to stretch for an eternity, thick with unspoken doom. "Global Voyager Airlines has determined that your conduct constituted gross misconduct," Finch continued, his voice unwavering. "This includes, but is not limited to, discriminatory behavior towards a passenger, public humiliation of a minor, repeated unprofessionalism creating a hostile environment for passengers and colleagues, and actions that brought the airline into significant disrepute, contributing to substantial operational disruption. Therefore, your employment with Global Voyager Airlines is terminated, effective immediately." Terminated. The word hit Brenda like a physical punch to the gut. Not suspended, not retrained. Fired. After 15 years, the floor seemed to drop out from beneath her. "Fired," she choked out, disbelief warring with a rising tide of despair. "But I apologized. It was a mistake. 15 years, doesn't that count for anything?" "Miss Jenkins," Finch replied, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "The severity and public nature of this incident, compounded by a pattern of prior issues and your subsequent lack of genuine remorse or understanding of the gravity of your actions during this investigation, leave us with no alternative. The trust essential to your role as a representative of this airline has been irrevocably broken. Details regarding your final pay, benefits, and the return of company property will be sent to you via registered mail." Brenda started to babble, a torrent of excuses, pleas, and accusations. She blamed Serafina Washington, calling her a vindictive manipulator. She blamed her colleague Kevin for not having her back. She blamed the PC culture that couldn't take a joke. She even tried to imply that Marcus Thorne had a personal vendetta against her, orchestrated by Serafina. Finch listened patiently, a silence that was more damning than any argument. When she finally paused, breathless and sobbing, he simply said, "The decision is final, Miss Jenkins. We consider this matter closed." And then, with a soft click, the line went dead. Brenda stared at her phone, the dial tone buzzing in her ear like a malevolent insect. It was over. Her career, her livelihood, her identity, all gone. The smugness she'd felt when mocking Amina's shoes, the brief thrill of power, had cost her everything. This was the hard karma, relentless and absolute. It wasn't just the loss of her job, it was the crushing weight of public disgrace. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution ran a moderately sized article a few days later. It was carefully worded, focusing on Global Voyager's swift action in terminating an employee for violating company policy and code of conduct after an incident that led to passenger complaints and operational delays. It didn't name Amina or Serafina directly, respecting their privacy, but it did mention allegations of discriminatory remarks towards a child. Brenda Jenkins, however, was named. Her professional life was now bookended by this public shaming. Friends she thought she had distanced themselves, neighbors whispered. The anonymity she craved was gone. The consequences didn't stop there. The union, while obligated to go through the motions of an appeal, privately informed Brenda that her case was exceptionally weak, given the weight of evidence and her own self-sabotaging behavior. Her chances of reinstatement were virtually nil. Her reputation within the airline industry in Atlanta, a surprisingly small world, was ruined. Finding another customer-facing job at the airport, or any airline, would be nearly impossible. Beyond Brenda's personal downfall, Shoegate had, as Marcus Thorne intended, become a catalyst for tangible change. Hartsfield-Jackson, under his guidance, fast-tracked the implementation of enhanced customer service and de-escalation training modules for all airport-facing staff, including those employed by airlines and concessionaires. They initiated respect and dignity awareness campaigns throughout the terminals, with posters and digital screen messages reinforcing the airport's commitment to an inclusive environment. Anonymous reporting systems for misconduct were made more prominent and accessible. Global Voyager Airlines, stung by the negative publicity and the very real threat of losing lucrative gate slots if they didn't demonstrate significant improvement, embarked on its own internal overhaul. They didn't just fire Brenda. They reviewed their entire customer service training curriculum, their complaint resolution process, and their middle management oversight. They brought in diversity and inclusion consultants. Mr. Henderson, the station chief, while not directly culpable, found his own career path at Global Voyager suddenly stalled. A quiet message that accountability went up the chain. Kevin, Brenda's junior colleague, was commended for his honesty during the investigation and was notably promoted a few months later, a signal of the kind of conduct the airline now wished to encourage. Serafina, back home after her trip, read the news reports with a somber satisfaction. There was no triumph, no gloating, just a quiet acknowledgement that a necessary correction had been made. She'd received a handwritten note from Marcus Thorne, thanking her for her unwavering commitment to principle and assuring her that her actions had precipitated long overdue positive changes at the airport. Amina too understood in her own way. She knew that what happened to the mean lady was a result of her own unkindness. Her mother had taught her that actions have consequences. She still kept her old blue canvas sneakers, not hidden away in shame, but on a shelf in her closet. They were a reminder, not of humiliation but of her mother's strength, of unexpected allies, and of the day her lucky shoes helped, in some small way, to make a very big place a little bit kinder. The story of the gate agent who laughed at a black girl's old shoes, and the mother who made one call that shut down the terminal, became a legend whispered among airport employees for years to come. It served as a cautionary tale about arrogance and abuse of petty power, and a potent reminder that dignity is not determined by the price of one's shoes, but by the content of one's character. And sometimes, just sometimes, karma doesn't just tap you on the shoulder. It delivers a full-blown, terminal-wide shutdown. The laughter had long since died, replaced by the quiet, enduring hum of respect. A lesson learned the hard way at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, Gate C33. And so Brenda Jenkins learned that every action, especially those rooted in cruelty, has an equal and often devastatingly opposite reaction. A single moment of scorn, amplified by a mother's unwavering love and a hidden connection, didn't just cost one woman her job. It triggered a seismic shift in an entire institution. Amina walked away with her head held high, her beloved shoes becoming a symbol not of shame, but of resilience in the day kindness was fiercely defended. This story reminds us that power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet call, a principled stand. It teaches us that dignity is inherent and worth fighting for, and that underestimating someone based on appearances can lead to a spectacular, life-altering downfall. Karma, in this case, wasn't just a concept. It was a full-system reboot. What did you think of Serafina's call? Was Brenda's fate justified? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories of justice and karma. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. Until next time, remember to treat everyone with respect. You never know who you're dealing with.